Three, two, one, go. So this is Tom, aka Jedun, here for Tabletop Tap Room. Bit of an unusual video, doing a live stream just because it's going to be easier to get it out. I won't have to edit and do post production. But I want to talk about. I was having a conversation with my cousin, and it got me thinking, and I just would like to do a little bit of a tribute to the man who has sent me on so many adventures in my life. And, many gamers out there would probably be like, oh, Gary Gygax, or something like that. But for me, it is my father, Thomas Veralt Sr. He was a gamer, but he was not into role-playing games. He kind of didn't get Dungeons and Dragons. However, when he came back from Korea, and I think it was that Christmas that I got my first Dungeons and Dragons product, probably purchased by my mother. Got it for Christmas, and it was the Moldvay box set, basic. And I asked my father to, if he could run it. And so it was me and one of the neighborhood kids, and Dad gamely tried to run, without knowing the rules or understanding it, tried to run Dungeons and Dragons for us. And we tangled with the party of brigands that were camping outside the keep on the borderlands. And, so that began my experience with Dungeons and Dragons. And my father was part of that. Even though he never really got into Dungeons and Dragons, I just kind of scratched his head. I mean, he was more of a, chess, checkers, Risk. He was killer at Risk. It took me decades to eventually beat my father at Risk. And the way I did that was in the 90s. I think I got Risk for my computer, for my 386 computer. And I played so many games of Risk against the computer, like over and over again, like 6-8 opponents. And, just to eventually, and I never did beat him at chess. I never got good enough to beat my father at chess. He was just a tactical mind. And one of the things that I learned about him late in life, that because he was always very lucky at games. And in fact, my mother used to say that your father cheats. So if you knew my mother at all, and anybody in the family will actually say this, they've heard my mother say, your father cheats. It's because he just won at so many games. He just won all the time. And I realized this, I learned the secret to how he did that is that sometime between the 6th and 7th go around with cancer, I remember it might have been the 7th go around with cancer. I said to him, I says, Dad, I don't get it. I don't understand how you can have such a positive attitude, and how, with all the pieces of your body that have been cut out, and, this doesn't work anymore. And, and you keep on going and you still have a positive attitude. And he said to me, I just always believe you play the hand you've been dealt. And as I pondered that, particularly towards, working on the, what is it where the eulogy for his funeral, I realized that, yeah, he'd have a losing hand, but he'd play it like he was going to win. He'd play it trying to win. And that was quite possibly the secret to how he did win so much, is that you just didn't know that he had a losing hand, and he didn't give up. He just kept trying to, he just kept trying to win. Doodle Squatch, great name. My dad used to play Dungeons and Dragons with me and my brother, but never used to play Dungeon with me and my brother, but never played D&D. Good memories. Yeah, I introduced my baby brother to Dungeons and Dragons. We actually played basic and expert D&D. Ran some solo modules. He didn't play with me and my friends, but I played with, I would DM for my brother. And of course, he was 10 years younger than me. So he really got into second edition. I was off going to college and doing stuff and drifted away from Dungeons and Dragons. But we played a lot of games in our house, and you just always kept trying to. I was always like, oh man, I got to beat my father at this game. But he's the one who set me on that. But it wasn't just that. I mean, I grew up in the Air Force and Strategic Air Command and on SAC bases at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska, then Plattsburgh Air Force Base. 9.5 years at Plattsburgh. We spent 9.5 years. Which is unusual. If you know the Air Force at all, you know that's really unusual. And part of that is that we'd been there quite a while through the 70s. And so Dad had to do TDY. He went to Korea for a year, 13 months. And during that time, Mom had problems with her shoulders. She had dislocated her shoulder. That's a funny story. She went to slap me or my brother, and as she wound back, her arm went out of the socket. And so, of course, we laugh, kids, right? Which comes around, goes around. I eventually after a car accident, I began to dislocate my shoulder. Discovered how painful that could be. So, I looked back at laughing at Mom with her arm out of the socket, telling me to call for help. Karma's a bitch. She will bite you in the butt. And what happened was I guess Dad had written a letter to Senator Muskie here in Maine. We're from Maine. We family homesteads here in Maine. And Senator Muskie actually intervened somehow, and Dad got sent back to Plattsburgh. So we didn't move after he came back from Korea. And in fact, he showed up at the squadron, and they really didn't have any good technicians in his shop. They had people with no experience. And they were preparing for the Iranian hostage rescue mission, the one that failed. And Dad showed up, and they're like, "We need you." And he's like, "No, you don't understand, my wife." And they're like, "No, we'll take care of your wife." Mom had to go for surgery, and Dad was off preparing secretly. They were flying. They're figuring out how to refuel a helicopter from a KC-135. There's a speed differential there between those planes. So, they were doing things like deploying landing gear, full flaps, put the KC-135 in a stall climb, and they would deploy the boom out behind the KC-135, and the engine's screaming because it's in a stall climb, full flaps, landing gear out, slow it down, and the helicopter come flying like a bat out of hell, according to Dad, up behind, and mate their thing. It was not the boom operator controlling it anymore. He'd just deploy it, and the helicopter pilot would mate, and they'd refuel. They figured out how to do this just for the Iranian hostage mission, which did fail. I will say this, it failed for two reasons. There was micromanagement going on. The two-star general was not allowed to blow his nose or wipe his butt without first vetting it by the then president at that time, who was a famous micromanager. And that same famous micromanager had dictated, "Oh no, we can't have any one service be the heroes on this." So he dictated, "We must have units from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines." And So they had helicopters there that had no business being in the desert, and they immediately foddered their engines with sand and crashed. And so that's why that mission failed. Anyhow, Dad sent me on adventures, and it was just little things that he did. Growing up in the military and the Air Force, when we eventually did leave Plattsburgh and go to England, I got to fly on MAC flights. I flew on a KC-135 coming back from England across the Atlantic, and got to lay on the observation couches next to the boom operator in the KC-135 and watch them refuel A7s all the way across the Atlantic. Mad cool. Being out at RAF Lake in Mildenhall, that my bus would pick up. We get picked up. We lived out in the country, but then the bus would pick up some more students at RAF Mildenhall, and then drive us to RAF Lakenheath, where the high school was. Well, that whole process, there were 3 occasions where I saw the SR-71 take off. And I count those as like really lucky occasions, because when that thing takes off, it goes straight up like a rocket, and you don't get to observe it for long. It's like gone, goodbye. So that was just mad cool. It was just, and flying on the KC-135, coming back on a MAC flight from Europe and landing at Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire. It was all adventure. It was just, this life that we had because he was in the Air Force. Mine at Air Force Base, bomber avionics. Dad worked in inertial navigation, the Doppler radar. In fact, he got his start. Actually, is a funny story. Because during the Vietnam War, turned 18, drafted, went in the Air Force, was a medic out Spokane, Washington, and did his tour, got out, came back, and I forget the name of the company, but they never treated it like he had left. So every bonus that he did not get while he was doing his military thing, they called him into the human resources one day, says, "Oh, all these raises that you missed and the bonuses, here's a check." And so they gave him a check for several $1,000s. In the 60s is a lot of money. And he immediately quit and went to computer school and learned to program computers in the 60s, key punch cards. And so he, top of his class, got a job right out of that school and worked for up here at the Bates Mill, basically all week, entering information into the computer so they could print the paychecks for the Bates Mill. Took them all week long. I mean, you can imagine what that process is like today. It's like probably a 45-minute process to get the paychecks cut for a company. But yeah, all week long. And then, of course, the computer would go down here at the Bates Mill, so they would send him down to Connecticut, and he would go into a company that was also owned by the same parent company, I guess, and use their computer at night and then do the same process. And so that company's computer went down, and so he got nothing done for the week. And when he got back to Maine, his boss was all BS with him and giving him a hard time. And the boss had actually fired somebody who was like 6 months from retirement to give his nephew that guy's job. And that wasn't sitting right with Dad. And so, this boss is just giving him absolute crap. You didn't do anything. He couldn't, the computer goes down, I can't do anything. You want me to do it by hand? So he gave us 2-week notice, and the boss said, "I don't need your 2-week notice. I got somebody here on Monday to replace you." It's just, so Dad walked out of the Bates Mill, and the Bates Mill in Lewiston, Maine, is on Canal Street. There's a little footbridge over the canal to Canal Street, and he's crossing the footbridge, and there was an Air Force recruiter on the corner across the street, going, hey, come here. I got a job for you. Dad went back in the Air Force, went to Thailand for the Vietnam War. He had all that computer training, and so he just trained to work on the Doppler inertial navigation radar and flew on B-52s, KC-135s during the Vietnam War. So that was how he ended up there. And some fun stories from that, but that's for another time. But the other things that one of the other things that he did, and I'm going to share this picture, was he put me on this quest to locate my Uncle Gideon. Alexa, be quiet. So my Uncle Gideon, my middle name is Gideon. I'm named for my Uncle Gideon. My father loved his Uncle Gideon. And Uncle Gideon had passed away in Somerville. He was living in Somerville, Mass. He had cancer, and I happened to be living in Massachusetts. And so, oh, geez. Dad had sent me on this, he, asked me to try to find Uncle Gideon's grave in Massachusetts. So, this was a multi-year quest on my part. It started in the 90s. I'd make phone calls, all the cemeteries in Somerville, Mass, and could never find him for years. And eventually in the 2000s, I discovered a national grave registry, and they had a photograph, not this one. And I was going through a divorce. So, every other weekend you're doing the weekend with the kids. And it was Memorial Day weekend was my weekend to have my daughters. And so I took the photograph that was in the National Grave Registry that had this tree and this fence. And it told me that, he was buried out at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, the military cemetery out at Fort Devens. And so we went out there, and, the kids were young. And so I says, all right, here's the photograph we have. Based off of this picture, I made it like a logic problem. So where do you think the grave is? And so I had them locate the grave in the cemetery based off the wall and the tree, and they found it right away. But it was an adventure for them. And then come to find out, Aunt Bunny was buried right next to him. So this was like a multi-year quest that Dad sent me on to locate my uncle that I'm named after. And, it was Memorial Day. So we cleaned as best we could, we cleaned the stone with bottled water and decorated it, and, took photos and brought them back to Dad. And, and then of course that led to getting stories about how much my grandfather actually hated Uncle Jed's wife, things like that. So it was kind of cool. Yes. When the internet was when the World Wide Web was this like hot new thing, and we were all just beginning to get email addresses, I was like, I just had this idea, like, you don't really necessarily want to use your real name in your email address. So I used my middle name, but I changed it. And since we always referred to Uncle Gideon as Uncle Jed, Gédéon, French pronunciation, I just changed the spelling. But then all my friends in college thought, oh, it's because he's a Star Wars, Star Trek fan, he's into sci-fi. They always thought it was Jedi on. They thought it was some sort of Star Wars connection. And so it's just kind of been my online persona. I've just persistently kept it since the early 1990s, with the very, very early beginnings of the internet, and my first email address, which was not Google, but back then it was something else. I still kind of keep that address just because I don't know if there's some website out there that's the recovery email. But that one's so spam badly, I generally don't use it. So yeah, that's where Gédéon comes from. It's my Uncle Gideon, and it was this multi-year quest of trying to find where he was buried in Massachusetts. Just because I happened to live there, Dad like assign the quest to me. So um, I actually thought it was a Star Wars connection. Yeah, one of my best friends in college. We had, you leave college and you lose contact with somebody, and somebody had done one of those CCs where they just copied a whole bunch of email addresses, and she's looking through the email addresses that were copied, and she saw, because she always thought my middle name was interesting, Gideon. Kate had married my other best friend, Doug. And so she always thought my middle name Gideon was interesting, and she saw Gedeon with the J in there. She goes, "I bet that's Tom." And so she emailed me, and hey, we got back in contact that way. It was kind of cool. But she always thought it was a Star Wars connection as well. Oh man, not Starfire, but Starfleet battles, and poor kid from poor family on the wrong side of the tracks. I played in a game and was like, "Oh, this is a great game." So I grabbed that kid's box set for Starfleet battles and photocopied the whole thing, including photocopying the little die cut counter chits. And then I cut them all out. So I had little paper chits that were not glued to cardboard. So yeah, my game, until I actually got, for a long time, I actually played with that game and photocopied the map and taped it together. I had such a chintzy version of the game, but loved it so much. Loved that game, played so much of it. Lots of Starfleet battles. Me. Yeah. Well, Dad was notorious not just for giving you interesting missions, like go find your Uncle Giddy where he's buried, but go chop down that tree. I brought one of my friends up here from Massachusetts. Dad had like brush he wanted cleaned out. He wanted a tree chopped down. I said, "Billy, come with me." And so I dragged Billy up here, and just for spent the night, and we chopped down trees, cleaned the yard. It's one of those, your father's getting old. He doesn't want to do that stuff. And Dad took us out to the Gridiron, and they had these $20 lobster rolls. You say, "Man, $20, that's a lot." You can't believe how it was like a sub roll packed with so much lobster. What a treat. And we had some micro brew beer. It was a Gridiron. You got to have a micro brew beer while you're there. And Billy's a huge hockey fan, and it's a sports bar. So they got like 3 massive screens playing hockey, and so Billy was in his element. So yeah, finding Uncle Gedeon was the cool mission, but there were so many things Dad assigned to me to do. It was just plain work. Rocket Mail, maybe. No, Hotmail. I had a Gedeon on Hotmail. It's spam so badly, but I open it up, and every so often I try to kind of keep it active, but it's spammed with so much crap. I just switched over to Google, to Gmail. But yeah. So I was Gorn, Starfleet Battles. Someone did Gorn Anchor to me, didn't even know what it was. Very embarrassing. What I had was there was a tactical, there was a Starfleet Battles tactical guide, some product. And I think one of my favorite maneuvers, I think, was called the Kaufman retrograde, where you flew your starship in reverse and you made the enemy come at you. So you would fly in reverse, and it was one way of always keeping your heaviest shields facing the enemy. So like if you were using a Federation heavy cruiser, the best shields are the first shield, number 1 shield, which is the forward facing shield. So flying in reverse and making the enemy come to you, it always guaranteed that your best shield was to them. If that got chewed up too badly, you switch directions. But yeah, I used to love that. I loved plasma weapons. Of course, the Gorn were famous for plasma weapons. Romulan War Eagle, the Warbird. Yeah, didn't like the Warbird. Played Starfleet battles in high school around 85. Yeah, so much Starfleet battles and Car Wars. Oh my God, Car Wars. But yeah, so this here was my high school in England, the Lakenheath Lancers, and I just loved growing up in the military. No idea that one of the bases that we were at, nuclear weapons are stored there. No idea. And even later on, it was this whole, we will neither confirm nor deny the presence of thermonuclear devices on this military installation. Yeah, okay. That's what those bunkers are that are all fenced off, high security over there. Okay, yeah, now I know. But I actually went to college with an airman, former airman, who that was her job, was to guard those bunkers where those munitions were stored. She would never admit that that's what it was, but I knew. And her personal sidearm, her personal weapon that she carried on duty when she was working at those bunkers was a 12 gauge shotgun. So I'd never heard of that in the Air Force either. I'd never seen anybody walking around with 12 gauge shotgun, but yeah. So Starfleet battles, super, that was super killer back then. Car Wars around the pool table. Don't ever try driving a Leo trike. I remember the trikes. I loved actually driving the pickup truck. And the reason why the pickup truck is that you've got limited space. So you're only going to put so much gear in it when you design the pickup truck. It's got limited space. You got all that cargo space. You can't really use the cargo space effectively for weapons. But because it's a vehicle that has cargo space, it's so much weight. So you can add so much armor to it. And so just one or two weapons and all that armor, I thought pickup trucks were the bomb. But if you want a battle wagon, then you maybe go with a van body. But I knew Car Wars was a different game. I had bought it, printed out all the stuff, got my D&D group to come and play it, and I had mapped out an arena that they had the sample arena. So I got the graph paper and I did the arena, and we were playing our first Car Wars game. And Darren had his car wrecked and his character was unconscious. And Thad got out of his vehicle, walked over, drew his pistol, and shot Darren in the head. And I was like, I don't know if you're supposed to do that. That's pretty different, dark. I knew we were playing a different game when we were playing Car Wars after that. And that was our first game of Car Wars. And we played a lot of Car Wars. Tried Ogre, but I was probably the only person who really liked Ogre. But picked up the original Car Wars plastic box set back in the day. You didn't have to cut up the counters for it. Or were they carved? I think they were pre-cut. I think they were perforated and you could just break them apart. Seems like I remember having to cut stuff up. Yeah, I love the pocket boxes. The Steve Jackson games, I really thought, I just loved picking up those pocket boxes. You could stuff it in a backpack. You could they were a little bit big for my pockets to try to put it in your back. But I love the pocket pockets. They were easy to throw in a backpack and bring somewhere. And you pulled out the game. I had Midville, with the city maps, with the scenarios for Midville. That was also fun. There was a lot of counters for that, for all the civilians, police officers, all the biker gang. So yeah, a pre-cut. I think they were, didn't they come in a little Ziploc baggie? And they were thinner than the die cut counters for like Star Frontiers that came in the Star Frontiers box set. So Oh, we got into big trouble playing on the pool table one time, drinking sweet tea and leaning all over the table. Yeah, actually, we used to play on D&D nights, Friday or Saturday night. We'd all go and sleep over somebody's house. We just stay up to 2 in the morning, and inevitably somebody fall asleep. Usually Thad would fall asleep, and so like one time we did the whole get a pot, a pot or a bowl of warm water, put us in, because we'd all be like in the somebody's basement with sleeping bags, just laying around in a circle, on our elbows playing D&D till people started dropping off, falling asleep. Wake up when you wake up. So yeah, that was our Saturdays growing up, Plattsburgh. Uh, but I never played D&D at school. We never had a D&D club, but I went to a Catholic high school that was college prep, and there just weren't a lot of us nerds there. But it was downtown and just a few blocks from the bookstore. So I could blow off riding the bus back to the base, go to the bookstore, hang out there a little bit, blow my lawnmower money, go home with a Dragon magazine or Space Gamer or Fantasy Gamer or, whatever I was happened to be picking up. Because there was a used bookstore, they carried miniatures, and then there was a regular bookstore. They didn't carry miniatures, but man, they had a good selection of RPG stuff, Starfleet Battles included. So, man, I thought you were going to say spilling sweet tea on the pool table. But yeah, I mean, because if you're going to do a war game, you need a big table, and a pool table would certainly work for that. But wargaming back then, I only ever saw Starfleet Battles, Car Wars, Ogre. It wasn't until I went to England and one of the airmen that worked for my father was into Napoleonics gaming in not 20, 25, 28 millimeter, the next size up, the 50 something or 70 something millimeter scale on a sand table. And, just massive amounts of figures on a sand table. And so he was explaining it to me because, you like gaming. And so he's trying to explain this to me. And I'm thinking, sand table. Man, I just thought, you're going to get sand all over your stuff. But yeah. And then eventually I learned more about wargaming. And yeah, sand table's a real thing. But it's kind of an older thing. My wargaming club had plywood tables painted green, 4 foot by 8 foot. And that's what we went with. So at any rate, I was just musing about, all the adventures that I had because of my father. Got me into scouting. All the adventures with camping, 50-mile hikes with the Boy Scouts in the Sierra Nevada mountains on the Kit Carson Trail. And was forced to make the tough decision. Do I take the regular 50-mile patch, or do I get the Kit Carson Trail 50-mile patch? I wanted both, but they wouldn't give you both. I went with the Kit Carson Trail 50-mile patch. And I'm glad I did, because this is a much nicer looking patch even today. But just Boy Scouts, got to travel the country, see the Grand Canyon, Petrified Forest. Traveling with the military was great. Being exposed. When I came back to Maine and I went to Orono, I remember there were people in my dorm who were born and grew up and never left within 20 miles of their town in Maine. One of my friends, his girlfriend was from Dexter, Maine, and it used to boggle her mind. I'd been to foreign countries, and and that's no diss on somebody who's grown up in a small town. It's just that having grown up in the military, you got to see the world, you got to see the country, Florida, California, Alaska. We traveled a lot of places by car because we had family in Missouri. We got stationed in Florida. We got stationed in Alaska. So you got to see cool things. You got to see 70 below zero. Go back to bed. You're not going to school. 70 below zero. Meanwhile, Dad's out fixing aircraft and that crap. And they had, apparently the Air Force has these things that just they run on diesel fuel. They throw heat out one end, and so you would go and you would turn the wrench 2 times. You go warm your hands. Go turn the wrench 2 times. Go warm your hands. Hell of a way to fix an aircraft, I can imagine. So yeah, remember doing a 50-mile hike for DMZ to Camp Casey in Korea. I'm sure they don't hand out a patch for that one, do they? So yeah. Oh, the DMZ. Dad actually volunteered when he was there because he's away from his family. He volunteered with a Korean orphanage. And when we were going through all his stuff after he's passed, we found, photographs and like letter, thank you, because what he did was, they had this orphanage and they're struggling to, it's an orphanage. But the civil engineering was putting in new sidewalks. So, they form up to pour the cement, all new lumber, and then they're just going to throw it away. So Dad went and signed out a truck and took all the lumber and brought it over to the orphanage. They almost got the truck stuck. Those little Korean, trying to get in there, and brought all this lumber. The orphanage is like freaking out, like, it's perfectly good lumber, and they're like, yeah, it's got cement on it. But we found a lot of this stuff that all this volunteer work he did with the orphanage over there, and so yeah, Korea, what an experience for him. And my brother went there with the Army, courtesy of the U.S. Army. And he's got some fun stories. I don't get kimchi. Okay. And I like sauerkraut, kind of almost the same idea. I don't get kimchi, and my dad and my brother love it. My brother dragged me to a Korean restaurant in Tennessee. Oh, they got the best kimchi here. And I'm like, you realize that smells like a dirty diaper. But so Korea barbecue, different story. I'm all down with that. But yeah. Oh, so many adventures, and my father is linked to so much of it. All these decades of gaming and fun and adventures. My father's linked to this, and I owe him so much. I wish I could talk to him, talk to him again and say thank you for being my first game master. That first time there after Christmas. You still haven't gone back to school, and you didn't even understand the rules. I had a better grasp of the rules, and he's trying to game master. It's just kind of fun. So, 2 of my uncles went to Korea, 1950, courtesy of the Marines. My Uncle Joe was probably there, same courtesy of the Marines, same time, and apparently he has this famous hate for lima beans. Apparently, like, lima beans were cheap, and the Marines were like, yeah. And he got fed so many lima, he would never touch another lima bean the rest of his life once he got back from Korea. And a great story about Korea. I had a 12-hour layover at LAX coming back. I went to Alaska for a fishing trip with my brother a couple years back. And so I did make the arrangements. Somebody else made the flights for me. And I'm like, 12-hour layover. Holy cow. So, what do you do? What do you do at LAX? I'm not leaving LAX because I'm not missing my flight. But I went and got a book, and it was America's Warhorse, or Reckless America's Warhorse. It's about the Marine Corps unit got permission to requisition a horse during the Korean War. And it's the story of this horse. And this horse, it turns out, played such a significant role in two battles. And these two battles may have, it's hard to tell, had something to do with the cessation of hostilities in the Korean War. But hey, Doodle Squatch, thanks for coming by. And yeah, so yeah, great story. I picked that up at LAX and read it. And just recently, they finally put a memorial to this horse in Washington, D.C. So there's a memorial to America's Warhorse, Reckless. She was named Reckless for the recoilless rifle. I didn't know this. The Marines that used the recoilless rifle called it the Reckless rifle because it was reckless, hazardous to your life. And apparently this horse would go by herself from the unit firing the recoilless rifle. She would bring them ammo, and then she would go back to the ammo dump, sometimes carrying a wounded Marine. They would unload the wounded Marine, load up, I think it was about 4 recoilless rifle shells in a special carrying thing on her back. And then she would go through the battlefield while artillery is bursting overhead. She was actually wounded several times during these battles at the end of the war. And she would find that Marine unit by herself, with not being led, by herself. And what's interesting about that is that it was shoot and scoot. You'd shoot twice, tear down the weapon, and then move it so that the enemy couldn't zero in on your location and counter battery fire and knock you out. And so all hours of this horse doing this. And so they finally, the Marine Corps was pretty fanatic about Reckless. After the war, she was brought back, and she was made a sergeant. And so the Marine Corps would not allow anyone less than 4 stripes lead the horse in a parade or a formation, because then you'd have somebody with lower rank giving orders to a sergeant, and you just couldn't have that. So it's, fascinating story about this horse, Reckless. Highly recommend the story. Reckless, America's Warhorse, I think is the name of the book. And really, really mad cool story coming out of the Korean War. Who knew? And apparently John Wayne, I think, tried to make a movie about Reckless, but it was, probably got the Hollywood treatment. But you read the story and you're thinking, this stuff's crazy that this horse could do this. And she was just a Korean racehorse. They bought her for, I don't know, $500 at a Korean racetrack, and impressed. And the really cool thing, and this horse really was a Marine, because there were 2 things she really liked to eat. Beer. She liked drinking beer, and she liked eating bacon. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, she was a Marine. Yeah, absolutely. And she'd walk into the enlisted mess. She'd walk into the officers' mess, just help herself. And of course, I imagine the Marines would be like, hey, but damn, horse liked eating bacon. How messed up is that? But Korean War. Uncle Joe hated lima beans. And yeah, we'll get off of that. We'll get off that topic. But so, yeah, Dad, I just wanted to say thank you to my father. He's not with me anymore. It was just coming across photographs today and went down memory lane and talked with my cousin Janelle yesterday about him. And I got thinking, it's just, he sent me on so many adventures, and he was my first game master. And he really had no clue what the hell he was doing with Dungeons and Dragons. So this is Special thank you to my dad. Love you, Dad. Thanks for all the adventure. So this is Tom for Tabletop Tap Room. Thanks to everybody coming by. Me just gas bagging about my father. Appreciate it. And thanks, Dad. Thanks for everything. And so, yep, Cal. Hey, it's good seeing you. So we're going to sign out here and keep on gaming and send your own kids on adventures if you've got them. You got kids, play D&D with them, send them on adventures, put them on a path of adventure, send them out in scouting, send them out on hikes, send them out camping. Do what you can. You might not be in the military, be able to get them on a Mac flight coming back from Europe, which was freaking cool as hell. But you do what you can. And adventures out there. Let's embrace it. And Timothy, later.